Hello, hi, hey, how are you? Welcome to my channel where we discuss, critique, and analyze books, share book recommendations, and do book tags. I'm Ainsley, and in today's video we are going to be discussing Agatha Christie's Crooked House, a standalone novel, and one featuring no recurring characters from her other books. Now, the main focus of this video is going to be discussing my personal opinion that Crooked House is Agatha Christie's most self-aware novel. I say this because Agatha Christie herself grew up in a very privileged household. She grew up with money, tutors, basically everything you could ever want. Now, I see Agatha Christie in the character of Sophia Leonidas, who is a protagonist in this. She isn't the main character, but she is the person who gets the ball rolling. I feel like that's the best way to say it. Sophia Leonidas gets the ball rolling, and she is the person who comes to our narrator and tells him what is going on. Now, there's a little bit more to it than that, but I see Sophia Leonidas as the Agatha Christie, as the stand-in for Christie, because she grew up with a lot of privilege, but she has stepped outside of her comfort zone, and she played a reporter role at war. And this is similar to what Agatha Christie did when she was working in poisons, or she was working as a nurse, and this is where she learned a lot about poisons and drugs and all of that while she was a nurse in World War I. And so that history aspect, that part of Agatha Christie's life, I believe truly inspired the character of Sophia Leonidas, and that is the character that really represents her and who she is and what she stands for, because Sophia herself is a woman of privilege and she tends to forget sometimes, especially when you see her inside of the house and you see her through Charles, who really begins to see her in a different light as well, though I do think he sees her through some rose-colored glasses for sure. So we'll definitely be talking about that. There will be some spoilers coming in, but that will be closer to the end, and I will be sure to warn you. If you would like to be a part of the conversation, please feel free to comment below with all your thoughts, feelings, and opinions. I would love to have a little bit of a conversation with you. I think that would be wonderful, great, grand. So let's get started. Crooked House is, like many of Agatha Christie's works, named after a nursery rhyme. In this case, there was a crooked man. The Crooked House alludes to the very interesting relationship between the Leonidas family, where Sophia Leonidas refers to it as a twisted and twinning place. She seems to be very aware of this, where I would say the rest of her family is not, and this could be not only that she stepped away from her household, but how she did it. Although the family is in a Leonidas household, it is 3 generations, due to the fact that they're in the middle of World War II. So a lot of families came together at this time. Now, while they of course have been affected by World War II, this is not in the same way as places like Liverpool that were bombed, or really any place like that. There's a lot of towns like Liverpool all across England that were bombed and people were displaced, and not to take away of anything that anyone like the Leonidas family would go through. I just think it's important to say that while they did experience some of the distress and maybe the company and everything was really affecting them, there's still a difference between maybe the way our narrator and what he had to deal with as being into the war and the things that the Leonidas were going through. And so you can see kind of that dynamic when Charles Hayward gets into the house. So the story follows Charles Hayward, our narrator, as he becomes a part of the investigation into the death of patriarch of the Leonidas family, Aristide Leonidas. He is the grandfather to Sophia Leonides, fiance, and at this point former fiance to Charles Hayward. He gets involved in a case after Leonides, or Sophia Leonides, comes to him and just breaks off their engagement due to the murder of her grandfather and does not wish to get married until everything is taken care of. He does not decide to join the investigation, but he does so when he opens the paper and sees two different death announcements, one by Brenda Leonides, his much younger wife, and another by the rest of the family. This is very intriguing to him, so he goes to his father, who works for Scotland Yard, and is able to join in on the investigation. It's interesting to say that Charles Hayward, like anyone, I personally believe, this is an opinion of mine, if you are a first-person narrator, you are going to we're not going to be able to 100% trust you, because you're going to see certain things through rose-colored glasses. This is how he sees Sophia Leonides. There are going to be certain times where he sees her in a certain way because his idea of who she is and who she was has been broken down by seeing her around her family. And you have him as somebody who I would say is lower middle class, going into this far wealthier household and seeing them in an almost resentful light as well. You see him have a much more connection with the wife, Brenda, who actually met her husband as a waitress, so she's formerly working class, as well as the younger Leonides, Josephine, who is 12 years old, and who really puts herself into the investigation. So that's how their connection goes. And so this is something I find completely interesting about this novel, or really anyone, and particularly any type of mystery or thriller, because we may think that, oh, this is a narrator that I can trust, but I don't think you can fully trust any narrator in the first person, because we're all going to see things and feel things differently depending on our own circumstances and who we are as a person. So I think it's really important to take that to note. The two major themes in Crooked House are class and class differences. We have the difference between Brenda Leonides and how she grew up, and then how she is a Leonides and now rich. You also have the fact that Aristotle Leonides was actually an immigrant to the UK, and he comes from Turkey, and so him being an entrepreneur and really a self-made man puts him at odds with his children and grandchildren who grew up within the family and the wealth that Aristotle Leonides provided. You also get to know the nanny and the tutor a little bit. They do play a part in this book, and they of course see the wealth every day, but they don't really get to experience it. And Charles, as well as the other investigator, come into the household, working class, lower middle class, and really get to see the way these different characters view themselves, these different people view themselves, and react to the fact that their grandfather and their father has died. And so you have and something that really stands out to me is you have Charles, who seems to connect a lot more with Brenda, and he seems to be able to just has a lot better of a conversation and a lot more of a conversational flow with Brenda, and that changes as he talks to other members of his family. Now, another big theme that is a through line of the entire book is the family itself, and really how wealth within a family corrupts people, and in this case corrupts them from birth. You can see how particularly the two sons of Aristotle Leonides and the expectations they have, and they think they have all these grand ideas, and yet they freak out when their dad doesn't want to give them money from what really is something quite mediocre. He doesn't, in today's society, if we were this way, he doesn't want his kids to be mediocre and really just throw them money and let them do whatever the heck they want. He wants them to truly make something of themselves in a similar way that he does. And whether you agree with that or not, I think in the end, at least for me, it's important to, if you are, let's say, if you have the money to give your child something, I at least think at a certain point they do have to earn their way. Now that doesn't mean that they can't use their privilege and their money and that you're not supposed to give them something in the slightest, because you are the one that made the decision to bring them into this world. But that's an opinion outside of this as well. But I would say that, especially when you get to know his sons, it's just the expectation of always having something handed to you and always having the opportunity to do something. This can also be this is also seen in his wives as well. You have his first son, whose wife is a scientist, Clemency, and she is obviously a lot smarter than her husband. She is also a lot more independent and not as interdependent and connected to the Leonidas family and within the household. She's pretty much living in the household just because of the war. And it's interesting to see kind of her and to read her, just how she is with her husband. And same goes for the younger son or the other son and his wife, Magda West, who was a theater actress. And she was, of course, very popular back in her day. She's falling off. But I think she's become more dependent on the money for that reason. She's not as young as she used to be. She's not as powerful as used to be. She's not given as many parts or is able to get as many parts as she used to be. So she's become highly independent on the Leonidas fortune as well. And it truly is about the way, not only how money corrupts, but how we as individuals can be so dependent on what is something we always have access to or something we've had access to for a long time. This is also seen in the grandchildren. And not quite as much in Sophia Leonidas, though there are certain parts, especially when it comes to her relationship with Brenda Leonidas and the way that Charles Hayward ends up seeing Sophia Leonidas. The rose-colored glasses and the romanticization of Sophia really begins to fall as he gets to know her a little better inside the house. And you have the two younger children who are both under the age of 18. You have Eustace, who is 16, and Josephine, who is 12, who have all the expectation and who really have not been taught to not be assholes, because they both are 100%. And they haven't really been able to step outside of the comfort of what it is to always have access to extreme wealth. And this is a running theme through not only the entirety of Crooked House, but through Agatha Christie's work. And I do think she is very aware of the privilege that she had. Did she always utilize it in the way that she should? No. Did she definitely had some slip-ups in language that she used, and her books are in many ways a product of their time? Yes. But when I read Crooked House, I definitely see someone who was pretty aware of how wealth builds a family, corrupts a family, and corrupts a person, and that is a big running theme throughout the entirety of Crooked House. While in Cairo at the end of the Second World War, Charles Hayward meets Sophia Leonidas, and the two become engaged, deciding to wait till the end of the war to get married in England. Now, as it comes to the end, Aristide Leonidas is murdered via kerosene poisoning when he is given an insulin injection with his eye drops in it, killing him. This causes Sophia Leonidas to call off the engagement, as she does not want to get married until everything is dealt with and the case is closed. So Charles goes to his father, who works at the famed Scotland Yard, and he ends up joining the investigation and becomes a house guest at the Three Gables, which is the house in the novel Crooked House. There we have the entire family, including Brenda, who is the widow to Aristide Leonidas. You have Edith, who is the sister-in-law and the sister to Aristide's first wife, who came to the house to take care of the children. Then you have his two sons and their wives, and then the grandchildren, Sophia, Eustace, and Josephine. Eustace is 16 and he has polio, and Josephine is 12. Josephine has her nose in everybody's business. She knows everything. And it turns out that because of her, everyone is aware that the Erisine that was used to poison Aristide was actually, everyone knew that this was poisonous and dangerous to his health, as he told everyone when answering Josephine. Of course, everyone has a big, giant motive because upon his death, everyone would inherit lots of money. Luckily for all the workers at the house, they are not suspects because they actually lose a lot from his death. They are no longer getting their bonuses and pay raises every single year. So while that is of course not lucky for them that way, they don't have to deal with that. So we have Charles Hayward that goes into the house as a guest, and he is there hoping that someone is going to reveal something to him, whether it be accidental. Of course, the person he becomes closest with in this is Josephine because of everything that she knows, but she holds a lot to her chest and hides everything in a journal, and he's not really able to get anything from her. Of course, with everything that she says, revealing little by little, her arrogance gets the best of her, and eventually someone ends up attacking her, and she ends up having to go into the hospital. Everyone, especially Charles at this point, is very worried for her because he believes her to be in a lot of danger, and this is proven to be true when the nanny drinks a hot chocolate that was poisoned that was originally supposed to be for Josephine. Charles continues to try to convince her to give up the murderer because he believes her to be endangered, but she refuses to do so. Now, during this whole thing, we have Brenda, who is arrested when it is revealed that she's been having an affair with Lawrence, the children's tutor, and so it is believed that they may have been involved in the murder so they could inherit money and then run away together. I did not believe this from the get-go because while I don't believe Brenda's love for Aristide was necessarily romantic in a spouse sense, I do think he gave her something special, and she in turn gave him this feeling of being young. So I don't see, like, even though she was having this love affair with the tutor, reading this, I didn't see that as being a reason she would end up killing Aristide, though it does make her a really great suspect. My assumption would automatically be from the beginning that that's just a really great suspect, great motive, but then, hey, look at these kids, look at these grandkids. And everything is set up wonderfully. And it's not going good for Josephine at all. So now we are going to get in the spoilers of this and talk about the end and where it went. So, if you don't want to be spoiled, it's time for you to turn the video off, go read yourself the book, and then come back for the last bit, because it's about to get crazy. So Edith, as I had mentioned before, who plays a very matriarchal role within the household, is very close to Josephine, and she ends up finding her journal and reading it. After this, she asks her if she wants to go out with her to get a soda, and they end up getting into the car, where they end up getting into a car wreck. While all of this is going on, Charles and Sophia end up finding her journal, where they discover that Josephine is the one who killed Josephine is the one who murdered her grandfather after he refused to pay money for her to go to ballet school in Switzerland. This caused her to be very angry, and so she takes a needle and uses the kerosene to poison her grandfather. And in doing so, Edith found this out, and she wanted to protect her from going to jail, prison, wherever they would send a kid in this time who murdered someone. Prison, I assume. And she takes her and decides to commit a murder-suicide to protect her. This is very sad for Sophia. This is very sad for everyone, but it really makes you think of how corrupting money and privilege can be, especially when there's not somebody there to really tell you how you need to not be such an ass and how you need to recognize that money isn't everything and not everyone has money, and that you're privileged to be able to have all of that money, and you're not going to be able to get everything that you think that you're going to want to get. I liken in modern day terms Josephine's attitude to someone with affluenza. I don't really believe that much to be a term. I don't think we need a term for it. I think all we need a term for it is absolutely privileged and having no education into being privileged, and then you think you can get away with everything because you're kind of a narcissist now. I think that's a pretty good way to explain it. Looking at the Leonidas family, I see a lot of people who are broken down by the walls that have been built around them. You have Aristides Leonidas, who immigrated to the UK from Turkey, and he was an entrepreneur who built himself from the ground up. He then gets married, has children, and raises his children in a house of privilege where they have tutors and people waiting on them hand and foot. And I can imagine that he didn't recognize exactly what he was doing until it was too late. The cycle continued with his kids, or his own kids, treating their kids as if they can have everything that they want. And Aristides Leonidas obviously didn't want this to be the case. He wanted to teach them a bit differently. It also seems that Leonidas was really trying to get back something that he may have lost through marrying Brenda. And even though I do really think she cared about Aristides Leonidas, I just think that she was more in survival mode, and that is why she ended up marrying him. And she really did fall in love with Lawrence, who wanted to take care of her. And I really like that they get their own happy ending. It's really shocking to see what happens with Josephine. One, knowing that she's not only a murderer of two people, she murdered two people, she faked her own attack, and she could not understand her actions, how horrible they were. And you have Charles, who comes into this family, and he didn't really recognize Sophia in that way until this happened, but you can tell when it comes to the end that Sophia is quite a bit different than Eustace and Josephine, and that Josephine is definitely the worst off. You have Eustace, who is very embittered by his disability, but you have Josephine, who believes she's the cream of the crop and that she deserves everything. And Sophia really wants to earn everything, or at least earn a lot of things. And this is why she is the one that ended up being the sole benefactor of Aristides' fortune. And I believe the reason that Brenda didn't get it was because he knew of the affair that she was having with Lawrence. The Crooked House, the Three Gables, is the crooked house that has a lot of crooked people in it, and the money that they have has caused them to be greedy. The privilege that they have has caused them to be crooked. I see Agatha Christie looking at this as a chance to really look back on her lifestyle as somebody who was born into a lot of privilege, and really recognizing the corruption and the bad that came out of it, and also recognizing how the greed and crookedness and corruption that happens within a really wealthy house can affect everything outside of it. Or other people who are brought into the house in the same way the nanny was affected, in the same way Lawrence was affected and Brenda was affected. And so it's really interesting to read this book and come to the end and then make this conclusion that this is a very self-aware novel, and thinking into Agatha Christie's lifestyle and the way she grew up. If you haven't read this novel, and even if you've come to the end and are spoiled, I highly recommend that you read it, because it's an interesting look at how corrupting privilege and privilege in that way is. These are rich English white people. The privilege of that is insane. And I don't know, I find that this was a great time to make this video. If you have any thoughts on this conclusion and any of my own opinions and thoughts regarding this book, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, and if you liked me, subscribe and ring that bell to be notified every single time I post. Check the description box below for all of my social medias, and I will see you next time. Bye!